talk about the Virginia Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. The team is going to tell you about a lot of exciting things that we have in store and changes. So who is driving the bus today? Is that Aaron? All right, next slide. Thank you, Aaron. So as everyone has heard before, our mission statement, but I do want to reiterate it. It's that DHCD is committed to creating safe, affordable, and prosperous communities to live, work, and do business in Virginia. And so to that end, everything that we do is around trying to make sure that we can stay within our mission. Next slide. So our homeless and special needs housing unit, we administer the state and federal funding for homeless service programs. And our goal is to address housing and stabilization services for families that are at risk of or experiencing homelessness in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So everything we do, again, is following our state policy, follows the federal requirements, but remember our goals are to reduce the length of time someone is experiencing homelessness, to reduce the number of new cases of homelessness, and to reduce the number of individuals returning to homelessness. So that's that whole homelessness should be rare, brief, and non-recurring. Again, our grants are very focused on these three goals. If what you want to do doesn't match with these three goals, it's not in line with what we're trying to do, and we would love for you to help figure out a way to meet those goals. All right. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rashonda.
All right, well, so this is Aaron Shoemaker, fellow program administrator, to Rashonda filling in for her here. So just to give you an overview of the grants that are part of the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Unit, the three primary grants are our flagship Homeless Services Grant, and that is the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program, better known as VHSP. Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS/HIV, HOPWA, a federal grant. And then the one that we're doing this How-to-Apply webinar for, the Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. And also we have just a little asterisk there just to remind folks or let people know who don't know that we are currently administering a COVID response funding program that has been funded by our partners, and that is to get our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness out of harm's way into shelter where possible so they can socially distance and ultimately get permanent housing and not catch COVID. Oh, and we, yeah, it's called the COVID Homeless Emergency Response Program, or as we lovingly call it, CHIRP. This chart right here just gives you the overview of those funding sources that I just went over. VHSP is a state and federally funded program or funding stream. HOPWA is entirely federal, and we've received a recent increase to that as well. And the bold Housing Trust and Homeless Reduction Grant, just to highlight what we're discussing today, is the $11.1 million allocation, and there's an asterisk there just to let you know that it could be subject to change, but that is our current expectation. That being said, let's see what I have here in my notes. The CHIRP, to give you an idea of how much funding we are administering with that, is $37 million to date, to give you an idea of how important our pandemic response efforts are currently, and yours as well. So this is just giving you an overview of the Housing Trust Fund in general, is that it is written in legislation that is for the intended purpose to create and preserve affordable housing and to reduce homelessness in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so Homeless Reduction Grant, of course, focuses on the latter half. Given that it's a state appropriation, the way that it's appropriated is a minimum of 60% of Housing Trust Fund must be used for loans and to reduce the cost of home ownership and rental housing. And this grant, the Homeless Reduction Grant, is up to 40% of that allocation may be used to provide grants for targeted efforts to reduce homelessness. And it's written in the language that priority consideration will be given to efforts to reduce the number of homeless youth and families. And we have adjusted our questions in the application and scoring rubric accordingly. One other thing I want to mention, so this is part of the 60 and 40% is part of the state appropriation of up to 30 million per annum 2020 to 2022 biennium budget. And we previously on projects had a $100,000 cap on the amount of money you were allowed to request for your project. That is no longer the case. To reiterate, we no longer have the $100,000 cap on the request for your projects for the Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. So we're not going to get too into the weeds about our expectations. Those are detailed in the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Guidelines and also in the Housing Trust Fund section. But one thing we always want to underscore is that all Housing Trust Fund projects must be part of or will be part of an effective emergency crisis response system. An emergency crisis response system is able to identify and quickly connect households who are experienced or at risk of experiencing homelessness to services, be those homeless services or mainstream resources. And so it also must align with your community goals, the programs, services around that one common goal. Michelle referenced earlier, that's that making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. Or if you prefer, instead of non-recurring, I believe the term that is commonly used now is one time, to emphasize that homelessness should not be repeating itself, ideally. And so the 4 goals of these projects are to identify those experiencing homelessness, prevent homelessness when possible, connect people with housing quickly, and provide services when needed. And so on this lovely stock graphic that we used here, we just break out the 5 main interventions and activities that we fund through homeless and special needs housing grants, just to give you a quick rundown of where they fit into your emergency crisis response system. I will describe them briefly. Outreach is where you have your staff or your volunteers going out into the community and connecting with households who are typically unsheltered and engaging them so that you can provide them with services and hopefully housing ultimately. Coordinated entry is a necessary part of every single emergency crisis response system. It is the component that is a lot of times the front door for a lot of households, and the coordinated entry must identify, assess, refer, and connect folks to housing services or other services as needed as quickly as possible. Targeted prevention, which sometimes we describe in tandem with diversion, is where households who are at the front door of your system saying, I'm being kicked out of my housing, I need shelter, what do I do? Of course, first you want to engage in diversion to see if there's some other scenario that you can engage them so that they're able to be stably housed. And if not, then you use your targeting tool in your community to prioritize households who are most likely to experience homelessness, if not for your prevention project. And then the emergency shelter and interim housing component of every crisis response system is, of course, the intervention you use, because typically speaking, hopefully, the sheltered situation is going to be safer and easier to engage them than an unsheltered situation, so that you can then, while they're temporarily in emergency shelter, get them into permanent housing. It's by getting people into permanent housing as quickly as possible. And later on in this presentation, we're going to go through the activities that are funded and how it relates to your emergency crisis response system. For this slide, I'm not going to go line by line and describe what each one of these grantee requirements are. We just want to communicate to you that in our homeless and special needs housing guidelines, we do have itemized individual grantee requirements for all of our grants. And then as that last highlighted bullet point points out, there are grant activity program specific requirements in the Housing Trust Fund section. So it's really just to make sure that you're meeting DHCD's requirements for audits and finances, you're participating in your community. Excuse me. And then also your organization is aware of, fair housing, equal access, housing law, and so forth. So again, I implore you to look on page 45 to see the full list. and please read the guidelines in their entirety, especially for the Housing Trust Fund section. A few other pointers, and this is just with giving you the application due date is December 7th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. That is when CAMS will no longer let you submit an application. Please do not procrastinate. We really want everyone to be able to get their application in. And so we work typical business hours, and we have a CAMS help desk, which also works typical business hours. So there's a good chance you will just be on your own if you wait, past say 4:35 p.m. on December 7th. So if it helps, pretend the deadline's December 6th, but we really want to make sure you get in your application. And so I mentioned CAMS. That's our proprietary system where you're submitting your application. That's the only way it can be submitted. And applications will be reviewed, evaluated, as it says, as they are submitted. So meaning if a week later you realize you forgot a thing, sorry, we need to be fair to everybody and review as is so we can get our panel going effectively and score the applications. The following organizations are eligible applicants for Housing Trust and Homeless Reduction Grant. Those are units of local government, nonprofit organization, LLCs, and community housing development organizations, or as they're sometimes referred to, CHODOs. And finally, we mentioned CAMS. That's actually what the acronym stands for, the Centralized Application and Management System. It's DHCD system where we do all of our grants, applications, and if you get approved, you also manage your project there and receive reimbursement. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We're talking about the application in this webinar. And so just make sure that your organization has a registered profile. Later on in this webinar, I'll be going through some steps and provide you more information about CAMS. So we're not going to get too into the weeds, as they say, at this point. But also just want to point out that if you have subcontracts or MOUs as part of your application, please make sure that you're articulating what those relationships are and why they're necessary, and make sure you're demonstrating the capacity of those subcontracts and so forth. And make sure that your organization does not have any outstanding issues, meaning you have your audits are up to date and good, and your IRS, and make sure you don't have any issues with DHCD that are unresolved, such as monitoring findings, for example, that haven't been resolved. So with that, I believe I am passing it over to fellow program administrator, Will Kerner.
Will is actually out today, so I will be covering this section. So my name is Kendall. I am the Housing Program Manager for the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Unit. I did want to note here that if anyone has any questions, we're going to start going through the eligible project types for the Housing Trust and Homeless Reduction Grant. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat feature of the Google Meet. Here, Taylor Ryan, another housing program admin, is processing those questions as they come in, so you can get a response pretty quickly. If it's something that requires a bigger call out, we'll bring that up at the end of this presentation. And then also, we will be having an opportunity for open Q&A at the end of this presentation. But don't hold back your questions. Go ahead and start submitting them as we go through these. All right,
Kendall,
so yes.
Before you start, because I want to apologize. I did not introduce everybody, and I realized I didn't even introduce myself. So I do want to take a moment. It got me flustered having to go outside and do the internet. Anyway, I'm Nichelle Carver, the Associate Director of the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Unit. Kendall Clater is our Program Manager. She kind of keeps the team in this amazing place and is the one who kind of answers all your questions. Erin Shoemaker is a Program Administrator. Taylor Ryan is a Program Administrator. And then our two Program Administrators who aren't here today are Will Kerner and Rashonda Lanier Jackson. And then we have Ara Mendoza. She is our Balance of State COC Coordinator. We have Andrea Ukrop. She is our Homeless Data Integration Coordinator. Kike Oliver is not on the call, but she is the Program Administrator whose primary duties are the Livable Home Tax Credit. And and make sure I didn't miss anybody. And then Rhonda Spear, who is kind of the glue and who you would talk to if you called the agency. She falls under our team, and she is our she's the receptionist. However, again, she's the first face of DHCD when you contact us or come into the office. But I want to recognize Rhonda. And I'll turn it back over to Kendall. Again, thank you for giving me that point of privilege to correct what I hadn't done in the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, so in previous years, this grant has supported rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, supportive services for chronically homeless, and pre-development for PSH projects. But this year, pre-development has been incorporated into the Housing Trust Fund application for our affordable and special needs housing, which is also administered by DHCD, and we've added 2 new project types and a new activity under PSH. The new projects are Unaccompanied Homeless Youth Innovation Project and the Homeless Older Adults Innovation Project. And for the new activity, PSH applicants may now request tenant-based or project-based rental assistance. So in the next few slides, we'll go into a bit more detail on each project type, but please do review the guidelines since they provide a much greater level of detail on the activities and requirements within each project type. And just as also a note, each project type does require an independent application. We did receive that question quite a bit in our last webinar. If your organization would like to apply for, say, a rapid housing project as well as a youth project, then you must submit 2 separate applications. All right, next slide, please, Erin. All right, Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant, rapid housing project requirements and expectations are modeled after our Virginia Homeless Solutions project and have 3 main components: housing identification, case management and supportive services, and financial assistance. Eligible cost types under this program include rent assistance and rent arrears, housing stabilization financial assistance, housing stabilization services and case management, and housing search and placement. Next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of the Unaccompanied Homeless Youth Innovation Project is to support innovative local efforts to serve unaccompanied homeless youth and pilot new models of assistance to determine the array of interventions necessary to serve that target population. There are 4 main components to this project type: innovative project planning, which is required for all projects, youth outreach and engagement, housing solutions, and housing-focused case management. And for this project type, grantees may choose to apply the U.S. Department of Education or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's definition of homelessness. And again, our guidelines go through all of the specifics of those both of those definitions. Next, please. All right, again, as previously stated, the innovative project planning is required for all proposed projects and may be used to develop and or pilot new models of assistance to best meet the needs of unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness, including pregnant or parenting youth, where no member of the household is older than 24 years of age. All projects must be designed to meet the unique needs of the target population in their community. And eligible costs for this project type are listed on the slide. It's important to note that all proposed projects must provide opportunity for youth involvement in the development, implementation, and evaluation process. Next slide, please. We did want to highlight the 3 eligible housing solution activities within this project type. Again, there's more information in the guidelines, but all require that youth experiencing homelessness be connected to appropriate and choice-driven service options and quickly moved into time-limited or non-time limited housing. And the 3 eligible housing solution activities are host homes, shared housing, and rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to move on to the Homeless Older Adults Innovation Project. That is our 2nd new project type for the Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. And it is aimed at supporting local efforts to meet specific needs of this population to end older adult homelessness aged 50 and older. This project type will support innovative efforts to serve older adults experiencing homelessness and pilot new models of assistance to determine what array of interventions is necessary to serve this target population. The 3 main components to this project type are innovative project planning, which is again required for all proposed projects, housing solutions, and housing-focused case management. Next slide, please. Innovative project planning funds may be used to develop or pilot new models of assistance to best meet the needs of older adults experiencing homelessness. All projects must be designed to meet the unique needs of the target population in their community. And again, the eligible costs are listed on this slide, but it's important to note that all projects must provide opportunity for older adult, age 50 and older involvement. Older adults, including homeless and formerly homeless older adults, must be involved in the development, implementation, and evaluation of the proposed project. All right, next slide. There are 3 eligible housing solution activities within this project type, and all require that older adults experiencing homelessness be connected to appropriate and choice-driven service options and quickly moved into time-limited or non-time limited housing. So you see a theme here with both of our innovative projects. The 3 housing solution activities are residential care homes, shared housing, and rapid rehousing. All right, that's it for our 2 new innovative projects, and again, of course, the rapid rehousing. But please do review the guidelines. They provide a greater level of detail for these new project types, and there's a lot of new requirements and information that's included in those guidelines. So now I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, who will review the permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless.
All right, thank you, Kendall. And so last but not least, the 4th funded activity through the Housing Trust and Homeless Reduction Grant is the permanent supportive housing activity. PSH is for chronic homelessness as defined by HUD. It is an evidence-based housing intervention that combines the 3 following elements: decent, safe, and affordable community-based housing, not time limited, hence the word permanent, affordable housing assistance. And then the supportive housing aspect of it is those wraparound supportive services that you're providing for those households experiencing chronic homelessness. And the end goal is same goal as all of our other activities: assist households with achieving housing stability. So the key outcomes and objectives for permanent supportive housing projects, those are the excuse me, the number of households served and how long they're served by your project, the percentage of households stabilized in the PSH project, and the percentage of households exited to a permanent destination. And this is something we touch on in the application, is if your community or your project has a move-on strategy where people are moved from permanent supportive housing into another more appropriate intervention, we would like to hear all about it in the application. And we actually have the page number on this slide for the grantee requirements specific to PSH, and that is 73. So we do have 2 cost categories this year. The returning one, that is the same as last year, is the housing stabilization services. This is most typically going to be your staff who are engaging in those housing focused stabilization services, as it points out on the slide, conducting assessments, facilitating the access to mainstream services and other community-based supports, and doing all the paperwork, filling out the service plans, and helping your clients engage those to get housing stability and engage a move-on strategy if that's part of their plan. And new to the PSH activities as part of the Homeless Reduction Grant, eligible activities for PSH is rental assistance. And that is exactly as it sounds. It is eligible as an activity for both tenant-based and project-based, as long as it's housing focused. And again, as Kendall's been saying with each of the activities, please consult the guidelines as it goes into much more detail than was our intention for this, because we really want to focus on just giving you an overview and giving you the information on how to apply. And that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to take you step by step through the process of how you actually apply to these grants now that you've seen those other slides and you are interested. What are you going to do if you don't have the CAMS login page already bookmarked and memorized? Is you can go to D8CD's website listed on the screen, also easy to find on Google. And then in the top right corner is an Access CAMS button. You click that and it takes you to what we refer to as the portal. That's the login page. There's a few missing steps here because we didn't want to get too much into detail about, the fact that you need to have a registered profile with your organization, I'll just mention right here that between 2 and 3, if there's any confusion about how to log in and access CAMS at all, please consult the CAMS user guide. It's accessible on the login page, and it tells you everything you need to go from step 2 to step 3 here. It's also available when you are already logged into CAMS should you run into some issues. And I'll show you that on some screenshots later on in this webinar. So you've logged in. The next page will have an applications and programs link that you click, and then you're taken to a page that has a top menu bar, and right in the middle of it, apply. So as Kendall pointed out, we have multiple project types, and you need to do individual applications for each project that you're doing, meaning you're not going to combine rapid rehousing and PSH. And so one way that we structured the applications this year is we actually do have 2 separate applications that you're doing. If you're doing a permanent supportive housing project, you'll go into the drop-down menu and select that one specifically. If you're doing a rapid rehousing or either of the 2 innovation projects, there's a separate item you select on that drop-down menu. When you click that, you fill out the thing. It asks you for a project name. You click go, and then you apply. Before we get to the screenshots, just some quick tips on using CAMS. As with anything, when you're doing a computer, we probably at all points in our lives, or any points, at some point, we've all lost work because we didn't save and someone tripped over a power cord. So it's the same thing with CAMS. Please make sure you are saving your work frequently. I believe CAMS, if you leave it sitting, it will auto log you out after 55 minutes. Similar to your online banking, Wells Fargo gives you like 10 minutes or whatever. CAMS gives you 55 as a security measure in case you leave it up in like a public library or something. If you have issues and glitches that you are experiencing in CAMS, we always first and foremost recommend please switch to Google Chrome. It is the most compatible browser. It's free. So if you're using Netscape or Internet Explorer or Safari or Opera or whatever, just download Google Chrome, and that has a good chance it'll fix your issues. And then we also strongly recommend doing your narrative questions, especially in locally on your device in a word processor like Microsoft Word or WordPad or Notepad, and then pasting it into the text boxes into CAMS. That's just, of course, an added protection to make sure you're not losing your work. And then those text boxes, they have, I'm told, a 6,000 character limit. I don't think we ever encounter people who really have any issues because that's per question. But it is worth mentioning that they only really accommodate text, some minor formatting, but text. So if you do have tables and charts and graphics, you're not going to be able to effectively paste them into that narrative section. Instead, and I'll show you this in a couple slides, there's an opportunity for you to upload additional attachments. So if you have those tables and charts, and that's great, we love data, but you will just have to include them as a separate attachment. So here we are. For the visual learners, such as myself, I'm going to walk you through, after you've clicked apply and go, and here you are in the application. This is what it looks like. There's 4 tabs I'm going to take you through. You can already see on this tab there's a button on the left that says save this tab. That is because we want to emphasize save, save, save. Please don't lose your work. We don't want this to be a tedious process. So we made it a point to have CAMS designed this way. This tab is where you need to put in your project primary contact. Should DHCD need to reach out to somebody in your organization with questions about this project or this application, that is who you put there. Project location, that could be the service location for your rapid housing project, for example, or some PSH projects put the actual location of the unit or the project itself. And finally, the primary service area, you actually have to manually add the counties, cities, towns, the jurisdictions where you're going to be serving. Typically, that's going to be your COC or local planning group jurisdiction, or boundaries. But if it just put whatever it actually is, put where you're serving. The project budget tab, this is the money. This is where you are putting in your total request, and then you're finding the appropriate cost categories for your project. So for example, as Kendall said earlier, if you're doing a youth innovation project and an older adults project, you're going to have two separate applications for those. So in this example, I just dropped down the Youth Innovation Housing Solutions project to show you the line items here. And really the key takeaway is just make sure that your total request matches what you're putting in on the DHCD request. I mean, CAMS won't let you not do it, but just that's what you're going to run into if you don't put in the correct numbers. And again, save this tab. So the third tab is those text boxes that I've alluded to, where you are pasting text. You can see, and if the picture is large enough, if the screenshot is large enough, you can see that there is some minor formatting you can actually implement when you're filling out the text boxes yourself in CAMS, such as bullets and bold, italicized, and underlined font. But again, just make sure you're not pasting like pictures and charts and stuff because it won't work. And then we actually have a save this tab button next to each question because again, we want this process to be as user-friendly as possible, and we want you to not lose your work. And then finally, the last tab I'm going to go over is just where you put in the required attachments. Actually, this first attachment here, certification assurances, there's a link beneath it. It's the only application where DHCD provides a standardized form that you will be using to fulfill that requirement. So you can actually download it directly from the application tab. And then the rest of them are things you will be uploading from your device, whatever that is, your USB, your desktop, or what have you. And then at the bottom, you can see there's some slots for additional attachments. So that's where you put your charts, your tables, your photographs, and whatever you need to make a good application. So this is exactly what I just went over, just bullet point, just to make it clearer than what you can see on a screenshot. I'm not going to go item by item. You can look into the application instructions and see what the requirements are, and reach out to us, of course, if you have questions. But I will just quickly mention the third bullet point, the letter of support. This letter of support should be signed by your COC and local planning group governing board chair. I just want to emphasize that may not be your lead agency, because we have gotten applications in the past that were signed by the lead agency instead of the community board chair. So one note I want to make about that. The other is that in the application instructions, we do have 4 questions that we are asking your application to have answered specifically in this letter of support. And I mention that because in the past, when we've gotten letters of support, they've varied tremendously in the level of detail that is put into those letters of support. And it is part of your application that we score because we're looking to see what your coordination is with your community and leadership in your community for your project. And then just a few more CAMS tips as they relate to submitting your application. Just so you know, multiple users can work on, edit, and review the application materials. So if you're not sure how to add people to your CAMS profile, that user guide I mentioned, actually, let me show you on the screenshot. All the way back here, if you've logged in, the user guide is what you can click right there. And the user guide details what the user roles are. And so if you have, say, a consultant or a grant writer who's working on your project and you want them to have access to CAMS, you can give them access to your application. So when you do save your application in CAMS, it will show the status listed as incomplete. Just so you know, that means DHCD has not received the application. We cannot yet review it. So that's good, of course, if you're still working on it, but it's bad if you think you submitted it. So just we want to make sure you're aware of that. Also, you can repeatedly return to CAMS to work on the application, so you don't have to do it all at once. You know, that would be strenuous. And then again, that 4th bullet point is just us re-emphasizing what is very important. Please save as much as possible. We do not want you to lose your work. Work outside of CAMS as much as possible. And so then you can upload your information into CAMS. with minimal glitches, hopefully. And then finally, once you have submitted the application, the way that you know that it is submitted for DHCD2 review is the status will change from incomplete to pending. And I believe that is all from me. I'm returning it back to Kendall. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, so we're just going to go over now, once you've submitted your application, what our unit is going to be looking for as we're scoring the application. So first off, 15% of the score is based on the Part 1 of the Homeless and Special Needs Housing 2020-2022 application. That is the 2-year application that's completed by the COC local planning group and submitted during the spring. We had the new spring applications that came in 2020, and this is how we fund our VHSP and HOPWA program. But with the Part 1 of that, it's all based on community level need, outcomes, and the community's response to homelessness. So we take those scores, and because we're part of a full package here of funding, we apply a portion of that scoring to our Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. So as we go through now the need, local approach, and capacity, I'm going to just let you know a little bit of what we're looking for. To detail need, the grantee will be asked to make the case for the funding for the proposed project using homelessness data. That data should be coming from HMIS, a comparable system, PIT data, anything that's relevant to really making your case for the proposed project. And along the lines of need, because we have lifted the cap on funding requests, so it used to be $100,000, as Aaron noted, it's no longer. We really want to see how much need is there in the community and what funding is really necessary to address that need and make the case for a successful project. So need is a really big part of these applications. Approach considers the details of the proposed project, whether it's aligned with state and federal goals and meets the grant guidelines and expectations, how the proposed project fits in the community's response system, and the expected outcomes of the proposed project. Local coordination. The score is partly based on the letter of support submitted by the COC and local planning group board chair, as well as the applicant's response to how the proposed project is informed by the community strategic plan and addresses an unmet community need, whether the project fits within the community's COVID-19 response effort, and whether or not community stakeholders were engaged in the development of this project. And then finally, for capacity, reviewers are asked to consider how well the agency implements a housing first approach and their history managing state and federal funding. Applications will be reviewed and scored by panel, and offers will be extended to those applications scoring at least 60 points based on availability of funding. Any remaining balance of funds may be allocated through a subsequent application process. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to say this for the third, I don't know, millionth time, but hopefully the final time. Before beginning the application, please do read the Homeless Reduction Grant Guidelines and application instructions. So the guidelines, it includes our homeless and special needs housing requirements and expectations. And then we have at the final section of that, it's all things that pertain specifically to homeless reduction grants. So please read those. The application instructions document is available in CAMS. It's also on our website, so you can read through the narrative questions that we'll be asking. It goes through those screenshots that Aaron just provided, but it's all really important. It can really help with the application process. But okay, make sure all components of each question are addressed in your response. A few of our questions have multiple components, and some of the questions, particularly for our combined rapid rehousing and innovative project application, they have portions of the questions that are relevant only to a specific project type. Ensure that the proposed project, its intended goals, activities to be funded, target client population, and staffing necessary to provide the services are described clearly from the beginning. It's really important that we get a full idea and visual of what this proposed project is. The need for this funding and the proposed project must be clearly supported by community agency level data and include include data pulled from HMIS or a comparable system. PIT count and other relevant sources. We said it before in this presentation, but again, because the funding cap has been removed, applicants must really make their case for the funding needed to implement this project. And we do have a question also in the application that says, you know, the minimum amount of funding that's needed. So you can request what you would like to request, but then also follow up with what's the minimum amount needed if we do run out of funding or get low on funding to make a successful project. Connect the proposed project back to the COC or local planning group's plan through policy alignment and performance outcomes. Clearly describe how the project fits into the local crisis response system and is incorporated into the local coordinated assessment system. And we want to know who is being served, how they will be served, and how your proposed project will help us end homelessness in Virginia. So tell your story. Please include all types of relationships that you've built with these projects and all the mainstream resources that you're going to be connecting individuals to. Really, what are you doing that is different, it's innovative, it's collaborative to functionally end homelessness in Virginia? This is your time to tell your story. All right, next slide, please, Erin. Finally, just some important dates before we get to the open question and answer section of this presentation. But December 7th, of course, housing trust fund applications are due in CAMS. The November 18th through the 20th is our governor's housing conference. This is virtual this year, so if you go to this link that is on the, I don't think it's supposed to be two HTTPSs, but anyway, it's Virginia Housing, governorshousingconference.com, vaghc.com to register, and you can also see now the full agenda for the conference. And then we, the Homeless Social Needs Housing Unit, we're hosting our annual meeting. It's December 1st and December 2nd. It's just half days. And we usually did this before the Governor's Housing Conference, but now that we're virtual, we wanted to make this opportunity to change the format and invite more participation, encourage more information sharing. So December 1st is for COC and local planning group leads. December 2nd is all of our Homeless Social Needs Housing grantees. So those invitations have gone out. If you've not received one, please contact your housing program admin or just email us. I think, Erin, if you go to the next slide, it's got email address for you because Erin's going to be taking all the application questions for the Housing Trust Fund Homeless Reduction Grant. So please email Erin if you don't have another person's contact information, and we can make sure that you get invited to the annual meeting. And then also we have the CAMS help desk here. So any application questions go to Erin, but if you're having any issues navigating CAMS or submitting your application in CAMS, please contact the CAMS help desk at the email address that's provided. Again, don't wait until the last minute. The resource team does work normal business hours, so they're not available after business hours. All right, and I think I see some questions coming into the chat. If anyone's dialed in, please feel free to unmute and you can ask your question within this. Let's see, we've got a question about multi-year funding to be considered for programs. Taylor Ryan, our housing program admin, is responding as we go along in this presentation. This is a one-year grant, so no multi-year funding will be awarded. But anyone else have any other questions? Our team is going to hang back here. We are still recording just in case any questions go out that we think are important for everyone else who are not able to attend this webinar need to hear.
And if you're on the phone, it's, I believe, *6 to unmute. So I think we've covered everything humanly possible, and that's why there's no questions.